Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and I'm sitting with Jake Bilbro of Limerick Lane. We're here in Sonoma, and welcome, Jake. Tell us about Limerick Lane and about yourself.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here, and it is a beautiful day. Limerick Lane is a 30-acre estate in the northeast corner of the Russian River appellation. I think we're a little bit unique in the sense that most people think Russian River Valley and they think Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. We make Zinfandel and Rhone varietals. Our Zinfandel was planted in 1910. It's 108 years old. And our Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre, and Petit Syrah were planted in the 70s and 80s.
And you are the fourth generation.
I am. I'm a fourth generation winemaker from Sonoma County. First generation, quote unquote, at Limerick Lane. My dad started a winery in the 70s when I was 1. He started a winery called Marietta Cellars. And I grew up with him in the winery and in vineyards. And I worked for him actually as well for 16 years, got a lot of experience. Actually, I would probably say I worked for him longer than 16 years. He paid me for 16 years, but growing up, there was a lot of work involved. But in 2011, my wife and I had the opportunity to buy Limerick Lane, and we decided that for our life and for what we were doing and for our children, that it was a good fit. And so that's where we've been since 2011. And
what is your total case production?
We make about 4,500 to 5,000 cases of wine.
And are your wines available across the U.S. or in specific markets?
A little of both. We have a really strong mailing list. We sell about 80% of our wine direct on our list. The 20% that we sell is available in about 12 markets.
So growing up here and growing up around wine, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Good question. Probably riding in the truck with my dad to check vineyards. He sourced a lot of fruit from around Sonoma and Mendocino County, and we would actually, I do know what it is. It was drinking cream soda, which I used to love. And it was always a special time to get cream soda in the truck. And we used to listen to I Love a Rainy Night by Eddie Rabbitt. Remember that song way back in the day? And we would sing and listen to music and drink cream soda and go check vineyards.
And what is the first or most memorable wine you ever drank? And do you remember the occasion?
First or most memorable wine I ever drank. You know, growing up, one thing that my parents did, wine was never taboo for us. And so I would have to say in some regard, the first wine that I drank was Marietta Old Vine Red because I've been drinking it my entire life. But because of that, because wine has kind of been such a normal way of life for us, I'd probably say that would be the most memorable too. I've certainly had special bottles and there have been special occasions, but the wine has always kind of been a constant, so it was never a really marking point.
Traveling the world abroad, what would you say is one of the best foreign wines you've ever drunk?
I did get to do a 20-year vertical at Beaucastel one time, and I'd say those were 20 of the best wines I've ever had about.
No doubt. Among all the populations of the world, who do you think drinks the best in terms of quality?
Well, somewhere in there, one would have to also, that would play into my personal preferences. And so I think that would be pretty hard to not say Europe in general. If you had to drop me anywhere in the world and that was all that I could drink for the rest of my life, I would, as much as I love Sonoma County, I would probably choose our sister in terms of regional diversity, but I'd say drop me in the Rhone. So,
have you been collecting wine over these years? And if so, what would you say are some of your most prized possessions in your cellar?
No, I don't collect wine. Interestingly, again, I am in the middle of the industry. We trade a lot of wine. I end up with a lot of wine. And so I really don't have a very large cellar on my own. That being said, I do have a soft spot in my heart for white Burgundy. And so that may be one where I've got a few nice bottles in reserve.
Anything in your collection that's drinking really well right now? Not your collection, but of the wines of your community that you've been drinking?
Any chance I get, I'm drinking Arista Chardonnay. Any chance I get, I'm drinking Moritz and Zinfandel. While we're a Russian River producer, it's always nice to get up into Dry Creek Valley, especially up into Rockpile. Any chance I get, I'm drinking Carlisle. Mike Officer's a great friend. For me, it's less the wine and more the people behind it. One of our dearest friends and closest, kind of companions in the industry is Morgan Twain Peterson at Bedrock. I'd probably go in that realm right there.
Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Only if I make it. No, I think that there's perfect moments, and based on the moment, I think the varieties follow and equally have equal opportunity to hit perfection.
And what is your opinion on wine critics and scores?
Interestingly, I really lament the times past. I think that it's a magical time right now in the wine world, as it almost feels like critical acclaim has been shattered, and there are so many more sommeliers and bloggers, and we're doing this interview and I'm meeting all these new people. But I do, to a certain degree, lament the time where there were some gatekeepers, because as an aside, I'm also seeing wines that are kind of passing the test and in restaurants that out of their alternativeness are on a list as opposed to out of their quality. I've in the past few years, I've tasted more wine with Brett. I've tasted more wine that's faulted. And while, for example, Robert Parker had a very narrow bandwidth of what was accepted or not within his means, or Lobby, who's never reviewed my wines, I don't make those wines, or anyone else that you wanted to use in that old guard, there were pluses and minuses to that. But it is frustrating for me now to see wines that I don't think would have been past the test before, and they're out there now.
Mm-hmm. So as a wine drinker, red, white, or rosé?
Again, I think I'm an equal opportunity lender. My wife, the answer definitely would be rosé. Although she has a pretty narrow bandwidth for that. That's another soapbox I can stand on the rosé topic if you want. Obviously, wintertime, reds more fit the card, but I am a white Burgundy hound as well. And it's rare that I would turn down a glass of good rosé.
Still or sparkling wine?
Both.
Champagne or domestic, or from another place?
Champagne.
How do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you feel that there are rules? White wine with fish, red wine with meat. How do you look at it?
I think some of the most interesting pairings have been when it's been a little outside the box. So obviously, I think that there are some traditional generalizations that one would follow. But I am wholly appreciative when I do a wine dinner and when someone surprises me with a pairing and goes in a direction that I would not see coming.
What do you think a non-drinker loses out on by not tasting your wines?
Nothing. You laugh at me. That's not totally true, but that's partially true. There is so much wonderful wine out there. And I mean, I'm being really honest, but for a non-drinker to start, would I recommend that they buy Limerick Lane? No. Our wines are more expensive. We're very fortunate that our wines are strongly in demand and our productions are low. And I would tell a non-wine drinker to start maybe a couple rungs down the ladder. And I really want to clarify what I mean by that is there are wonderful wines that are more accessible at more affordable prices. And if they really enjoyed them, there are some nuances and there are some very specific qualitative aspects of Limerick Lane that I don't think you can find anywhere else in the world. I think we have one of the most unique growing sites in the world. And I think that that's why we get the accolades that we do. But for a non-drinker, I'd say take it slow.
And when someone gets to a point when they want to explore your wines, what are some of these nuances and unique elements to Limerick Lane?
So the Limerick Lane estate, aside from being planted now for over 100 years with original vines still in production. It's on the extreme northeast corner of the appellation. We're actually dual appellation with Chalk Hill. That's really important because our diurnal shift is greater in terms of temperature swings than almost anywhere else around us or anywhere else that I've seen. Just over the hill from us, they're growing and ripening Bordeaux varieties. But just to the south and west of us, it is Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. That's because being in the Russian River Valley, we have that beautiful, glorious Russian River fog and cold nights and cool mornings. But being on the corner, the northeast corner, that fog is burned off by 10 o'clock and we have those really warm afternoons. The Zinfandel and the Rhone varieties that we grow have chemistries that in my lifetime and in my experience working with my dad across 3 counties, I have not seen anywhere else. And we make textured, rich, full-bodied wines with really, really high levels of acidity that make them very clean and very precise. And I think that's a really compelling mixture that's really you don't find very often.
So if space aliens were to land on your property, what is the bottle of wine you'd want to introduce them to?
That would be a really easy answer. That we are a little different than most wineries in California or most wineries in the United States. The most common norm here is for wineries to go out and source fruit and or designate vineyards and make, a lot of different varieties. We only make what we grow. And something that I'm very committed to, and I feel very much in our future. If you look, speaking of Beaucastel, as I did earlier, if you look in Chateauneuf de Pape, there's 13 different varieties, but a winery like Chateau Beaucastel makes one wine, and it's blended across those 13 varieties that they grow, and then they assemble a blend. If you look in Bordeaux, it's very similar with 5 varieties where, these amazing, great, world-class estates will make a single blend off of those 5 varieties. We do the same thing at Limerick Lane. Our varieties are Zinfandel, Petit Syrah, Mourvèdre, Grenache, and Syrah. I think that we're doing something that's really alternative, but I also think it's extraordinarily unique. It's never been done before. But our estate cuvée, which is my answer for you, is also the highest rated Zinfandel in Wine Spectator history. It's also a wine that's garnered significant press and accolade. And I think that that's the case because it is just incredibly unique.
Do you think that every vintage tells a different story? Do you see more similarities or differences from year to year? I mean, you've grown up here, you've spent time in the vineyard. How do you look at vintage?
For the wines that I make, vintage is everything. I really look at Limerick Lane as our variety. The varietals that we grow are really lenses through which the site is speaking. And so we are completely site driven, and the X factor is going to be how the vintage affects that. I do think our wines vary from vintage to vintage, but of course there's a common thread being that they all come from the same site. Other producers who are sourcing fruit from various sites and or various appellations, obviously they can mitigate that. And there's some real appeal to that. Going back to a first-time wine drinker, find something you like and be able to get it again and really wrap your arms around it. I think that is of great merit.
Do you have any signs or predictors that will help you kind of predict the outcome of a harvest?
Well, I think one of my favorite quotes ever is that Mother Nature always bats last. And so I don't think there are any signs or predictors in that regard. But on the flip side, having a vineyard that's been in existence for 108 years, I think that's a pretty good predictor. It's still there. So obviously I think we're doing something right.
And do you have any rituals or traditions that you do for harvest?
Certainly enjoy a little bit of champagne on the first pick. More than that, my children have negotiated with me now. And believe me, it's a negotiation. I don't know how I ever lost control, but apparently I did. My children stay home every day from school on the first day of harvest, and they help us all pick. And that's something that they have lobbied for, especially my 10-year-old. And that's very much in his blood and in his DNA. And so he gets to miss school in order to pick. That's probably more important than the champagne. That's a pretty good tradition. Yeah.
Many producers walk through their vines, they talk to their grapes, they go in the cellar, they talk to the wine in the barrel. Do you talk to your wine? And if so, what do you say to it?
No, I don't talk to my wine. But I will say, another quote that I really live by a lot, and it plays into my children, but it also plays into winemaking. You can't have wines of terroir without men and women of terroir. And that's just something that we live on the estate. We live with those vines. We're there year round. I really lament the fact that there's a lot of wines that are made now where the winemaker doesn't go out to the vineyard until 2 weeks before harvest. And those grapes are picked and they go into a big tank with other grapes. And the nuance and the uniqueness of those grapes are never even found enough to then be lost. We live there. We're there at night. We're there in the morning. We're there in the afternoon. There's a lot of times where certain blocks, absolutely that it's ready to be harvested. And I never have to do check the bricks or check the acid.
So you may not be talking to your grapes, but you do have an unspoken communication and understanding of each other.
I think if you spend enough time with them, you don't have to talk to them because they talk to you.
Mm-hmm. When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a good question. I don't know that there was ever a profession of what I wanted to be. I think it was more how I wanted to live. And I think I wanted to live very much like my dad, my parents, but my dad in particular. And I guess I'm very happy to say that I am. I didn't know that we would ever have the opportunity that we did. Limerick Lane kind of fell into our laps, that opportunity. But I'm very happy to be raising my children in the way that I was raised. And I think that I think that would be my answer.
When you're not working, how do you spend your free time? Or do you have free time?
Yeah, I don't have free time. I have 4 children. We have, I believe at last count, currently we have 16 animals. My wife brings everything home under the sun on 2 legs, 4 legs, or that slithers. But I also would probably say that I'm never working. I absolutely adore my family. I adore being with my family. I adore my children. I adore my wife. And I think that goes back to the quote of living a life of terroir, so to speak. I think if you're doing it right, there's very little time that you actually feel like you're working if you're doing it right.
So on the rare occasions, well, hopefully they're not that rare, but you get a romantic evening with your wife, the kids are asleep or slumber parties or something. What is the wine that you would be drinking?
Those nights don't exist. I'm sorry. Next question. No, I'm just kidding. I do have 4 children here, Allison. And with my wife, the fact that she brings all the kids home, I think probably every other family in Healdsburg and Greater Sonoma County can thank us because they all get the romantic nights because the sleepovers are always at our house.
Okay, so in 20 years when the kids are gone, what do you think you'll be drinking?
Let's put it this way. What do I drink on those nights in order to stay sane because I have all those kids? Champagne. But the culmination of the evening is not quite what most people would think. It's usually that I get to fall asleep on the couch because there's 3 other kids in my bed next to my wife.
Well, do you have time for sports?
Skiing. Yes, absolutely. The greatest aspect of the wine industry to me is how seasonal it is, and the winters are very slow. Both of my boys are on the ski team. We go up to Tahoe almost every weekend, and I think I got 36 days of skiing in last year with the boys and my daughter.
That's an impressive number when you don't live technically in a ski area.
We drive a lot. But sliding down the hill and getting to feel weightless is worth it.
You've given me a lot of quotes and some actually really good quotes, but what would you say the best advice is you ever received?
Those are all patented and trademarked, by the way. No replication of this. Thank you. Best advice that I've ever received. We bought Limerick Lane in 2011. We were 100% financed. Within a year of buying it, our daughter was born and we adopted another boy. We were trying to turn a winery that was right on the verge of going into foreclosure. It's been a whirlwind. And actually, Dan Costa from Costa Brown Winery, who's also a very, very wonderful friend of mine, he is a very, very optimistic person and friend. And I think he said, if you always look at it right, there's a really awesome ride you can be riding. And I really think I try to emulate that a lot, but I also would attribute a lot of the success that he continually seems to see to his approach. So that would be my answer.
And you gave our listeners some really good advice when it comes to purchasing wine. So I don't know if you have something else to add, but if you could give them some great advice, what else might you add to what you already said?
Well, I can give you our website if people wanted to sign up for our mailing list. I think that would be some great advice. Just go to www.limericlanewines.com. Advice. I think that my advice would be to find a sommelier or find a wine shop. And to not feel intimidated by wine. It can be very intimidating, and it doesn't have to be, and the right people aren't, and they shouldn't be. I really do not like the intimidating aspect of wine that some people tend to perpetuate. But finding somebody that you know and trust who can talk to you about your palate and help you to learn, you can find your way pretty quickly.
So I know we've talked and you've achieved a lot, and I think there's a lot to be proud of. Is there one thing that would be your proudest achievement to date?
That my wife hasn't left me yet in the middle of all this. We have done a lot. Somebody can go to our website and see our accolades and see our achievement. I think what I'm most proud of is that I don't think we've ever faltered from being family first and from teaching our children. And I think teaching our children the right things, not just teaching them. Mm-hmm. And we're a family union. That's what's most important.
And I would add to that you're probably pretty proud because your 10-year-old son is a winemaker now too.
He is. A sip of water. Yes, my 10-year-old son is on his third vintage of wine, and we just came back from Emeril Lagasse's Carnaval du Vin in New Orleans, which is his largest fundraiser of the year. And my son auctioned off his wine, and I was very proud to see him get on stage and speak in front of 700 people and raise $277,000. So that money is all going to children, and that is something that very much warms my heart. But I also will say what I'm proud about in that, and what I was referring to earlier, is that we went in a day ahead of time and we visited all of the beneficiaries. So my son actually got to see what his work, both in making the wine as well as what the money that's raised from it, how that helps. And I think that that's what is most important.
I think that's a very proud achievement. So congratulations.
Yep.
Complete the sentence. A table without wine is like?
A table without a fork and a knife.
Fair enough.
All right.
If the paparazzi shoot a photograph of a VIP, living or deceased, from any walk of life, sitting in a restaurant, and on that table is a bottle of your wine, who would you want that person to be?
Ernest Hemingway.
Such a quick answer.
Yeah.
I like that. Do you think we'll be drinking wine in 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years time?
I hope so. And if I could riff off of that one for a minute, there is a cultural aspect to wine that to me is just central. And one of the things that I really lament is how much of it is being lost as of late. Rosé, for example, is now a cultural phenomenon. It's a year-round thing. Yet most of the rosé that people drink isn't even made in the traditional manner anymore. It's all a saignée, and the way that it is made now is that juice is bled off of red wine in order to intensify the red wine, and then it is reacidified with bags of tartaric acid and watered back with gallons and gallons and gallons of water, and chemistry-wise, all of a sudden, there's your rosé. Rosé is one of the funnest wines to make. It's early in the season. You're amped up. Harvest is just about upon you. You pick this fruit. You're watching it change color in the press as it's starting to gain. You're making this very active decision. It's a cultural aspect of winemaking and of living amongst vines. So to answer your original question, I hope so. And I hope that 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, we haven't lost the ability to enjoy it. And I hope that we haven't lost what really the definition of wine is, which to me is equally important.
If you were being sent off to a deserted island, what are the 3 wines you would take with you?
Well, does it have to be a producer, or can it just be a
category is fine?
Champagne, Chablis, Côte Rôtie.
And what is one winemaking region in the world that you still want to explore?
I would love to spend, I've never been to Italy. I would love to spend some time there. My brother makes all Italian varieties at his winery called Idlewild, and he specifically focuses on Piedmont varieties, but he's been there a number of times, and I am inordinately envious when I see his pictures. So that would be my answer.
So the last thing before we finish, Wine Soundtrack, we like to bring together wine and music, as that plays a big role in our lives. So based on some of the wines you were just talking about, I want you to tell me what you listen to or what it makes you think of. So let's start with that Côte Rôtie.
Interesting. Can I augment my answer?
Sure.
Can I riff a little bit more?
Sure.
I think that there's a subset of winemakers who make wine in a very different manner, but it's completely musically driven. I think that people who make Chardonnay, people who make Pinot Noir, people who make Cabernet make world-class wines. But to me, those wines, Chardonnay, for example, is very much like a symphony. It's very precise, it's very exact, and it's very controlled from start to finish. People who make Zinfandel, people who make field blends, people who do that, it's very much like playing the blues or like playing jazz, because when you are working with old vine, field blended vineyards, and there are other varieties that you can't control their aspect, you have to surrender that control and you have to be okay with what comes. And I think that that approach is really important. But I swear I've been at wine tastings or at conferences, etc., and you can almost pick a Zinfandel winemaker out of the crowd. And at that point, I would say that regardless of the wine that they were listening to, they would be listening to a certain, regardless the type of music they were listening to, they would be listening to a type of music that matched the approach and the way that they were making wine.
Mm-hmm. So what do you listen to when you're making your estate wine?
Well, that comes down to how tired I am. If I am running a little short on sleep and we're towards the end of harvest, a little Black Keys will always turn the party around and get you going. And if we're a little earlier into harvest, maybe a little bit more classic, but having a little bit of drive, a little Stevie Ray Vaughan never turns you wrong.
And for those really good rosés that you and your wife will drink in those rare moments of quiet.
In those rare moments of quiet, I think I would take the moments of quiet, and I don't think I would put any music on, because with 4 children in our life, those moments of quiet rarely exist. Normally, the background soundtrack is the children all running around and going crazy, and actually that's pretty beautiful music too.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Jake, thank you so much for joining us here at Wine Soundtrack. And if you can remind our listeners where they can find you and your wines.
Sure. www.limericlanewines.com.
And do you have a tasting room where people can visit, or?
We do. We're just south of Healdsburg. Address is on our website. We do taste by appointment only. So you set an appointment and we would love to see you.
Fantastic. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.